Hi, nerds. This is Nicole Dessain. Welcome to Talent Tales, the show where I interview leaders who have brought design thinking to their talent and HR practices. In today's episode, we have a special guest on the show. I'm joined by Diana Marchese, who is the Director of People Experience at Snyk. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
So glad to you could join us today. And sorry, I'm tripping up a little bit because I've been
It's Friday.
practicing her last name. So
If anyone's struggling, I
know.
spelled it out phonetically.
And I got
in
it
the
right,
chat.
and then I got the next sentence. All it's Friday afternoon. All right, I'll have you talk, Diana. What's your
Okay.
story? Why don't we start with your story, Diana?
Oh, you want to see somebody trip up now? So my story. I am Diana Marchese, as Nicole fabulously said, and with no mistakes in the name. I am a dog whisperer, a cat mom, a Boston transplant from New Jersey. I also happen to be the director of people experience here at Snyk. So, I guess in terms of my story, a little snippet into where I'm coming from. I think I started in the design thinking world before I really even knew what that terminology was. It was a bit more organic. So to give some context there, I was an art teacher for some years. So as everyone on this call knows, I would say the best way to implement design thinking is to be a teacher, is to collaborate and think holistically about the entire experience of your students. Because as a teacher, you are a coach, a counselor, a caregiver, an instructor, a cheerleader. You are all of these facets, and you are really approaching teaching in a human-centric, student-centric kind of manner. So you're focusing on everything from their safety to their zone of proximal development to the level of engagement and the content itself. So I think I already had those tools before I recognized that these were all approaches and facets of design thinking. So fast forward, I swerved, which is, a little pivot there, to workplace experience in 2015. So I think it was a fairly easy transition in that employees are just very big students. And it kind of comes down to that they all want the same things, right? So the larger whys are very similar to what students want, which is to be heard, to feel safe, to have an impact. And, stickers suddenly became swag and snacks stayed snacks or catered lunches. But essentially a lot of that was really, was fairly translatable to this new world I found myself in. So fast forward again, I found myself at Snyk on January 27th, 2020. So
Oh, wow.
We all know how this story ends. A couple of months later, not like 4 weeks later, we're talking about closing offices and safety and transitioning our entire company to a virtual experience and going virtual, which we at the time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, thought would only be until September or so. So I think, yes, that was again an opportunity to take all of this and put it into action, right? Because the pandemic, I would say, was one of the most critical times to have a human-centric approach, to be empathetic, and to really meet your people where they were. So that's where we are now, and hopefully the upside of that. But that's a little bit from where I'm coming from.
Such a fascinating story. I always love when people in our space come from different backgrounds. I've actually, in a lot of my interviews, I've had that, and it's the most fascinating journeys. And they also always say, this is where I learned some design thinking mindsets even before I knew what they were. And I love that you talk about the teacher being really a design thinker. And what we then always, the counterpart to that is the child. And in design thinking, what we say, especially when we talk about creativity and drawing, visualization, as children, we have had all those skills. And then as adults, we have unlearned them. So it's also that, you work a lot with children, which is, again, probably makes it helps when you try to get adults to be more creative, right? And you probably have some, I know actually you have some very creative sort of icebreakers and warm-ups that you use. So you bring that creativity that you worked with children also to your work, which I love.
For sure, there has to be a level of play to everything, right?
Yeah.
There has to be that engagement, and I think if you approach anything too seriously, we get kind of caught in the whether it's imposter syndrome or the way that things have been done, or kind of choked up in that respect. So I think a level of play is always healthy.
And that's so interesting because using the word play, even in the workplace, has not been embraced
Mm,
previously, right? But now with Lego Serious Play and embracing design thinking and other agile methods, I think we're getting more and more open to that. So I'm hopeful, and I'm not a creative by nature either, but I just love to flex my creative muscle because we all still have it. It's just with some of us, it's buried more deeply these days than it
yeah.
used to be, right? Um, cool. So Diana, a favorite question of our audience. So I'm excited
Hmm.
what you're going to share is what's your superpower?
Can I
And
tell
maybe you
you,
have a visual to illustrate as well.
this is the most difficult question. This is of all
Be
of
a
the
little
questions.
play here, a little play.
All right, yeah, right. I feel like I've set myself up for a
Uh-huh.
level of expectation here
Yep.
as an art teacher and talking about plays. So my superpower, I would say, is I I found that I've become very good at taking ambiguous ideas and being able to turn them into tangible results. So I think with those ambiguous ideas, sometimes it could be very easy to get caught up in unraveling just one facet of it. And everybody chases down that. And especially during a time where we are all zoomed out, spending 45 minutes on
Mm-hmm.
one topic of a much larger, broader issue doesn't help anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I found that I've become very good at putting more of those ambiguous issues and topics into buckets to make them more bite-sized, to make it so
Mm-hmm.
we can take those buckets and then turn them into sprints and turn those sprints into action, and taking that larger topic and kind of wrestling with it and turning it into something that's manageable. So for example, I think one that most people can resonate with right now, at least within the people teams, is return to workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is just such a multifaceted, multi-legged and armed kind of beast that we're all grappling with. And it's very easy to be discussing your approach to incentivizing vaccines. And somebody says, well, what about the elevators? If the elevators are crowded, how do we approach that? Which is fair. What about the elevators? But I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to then chase down that one topic and lose sight of the larger issue or what you're trying to solve for. So I found that I've just kind of brought on a couple of tactics in terms of taking those larger things, putting them into buckets and making them more attainable. So my
Mm-hmm.
image for that, which now that
Oh,
I said I'm an art teacher, makes
yeah.
me very nervous about how everyone's going to
Love,
respond to my
no,
drawings.
I love it.
But we have the little thinking emoji,
Yeah.
turning into these are buckets.
Yeah.
So turning a larger topic into those buckets that then turns into the little flex arm, which is action.
Love it.
Yeah, so I will say a lot of this is
Elaborate.
also inspired by Snyk. We use emojis a good amount, so it was inspired by that as well.
So creative.
Thank you.
And what a great superpower to have these days, right? I think we are just
For
in a
sure.
world where attention spans are so short. Everybody's burned out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have all these complex issues that we need to tackle
Hmm.
every day.
Yeah.
So how do you make that, tangible and digestible for people? So what a great superpower to have these days.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit more about how you discovered design thinking and agile and how you've applied it at Snyk. I know you started you didn't know what it was as a teacher, but then how did you become more conscious about it? And then how did you apply it at your current organization?
I again think this was a bit more of an organic approach. I would love
Hmm.
to say I've taken more courses and I really am up to speed on the terminology, but truthfully, I believe the concept has always sort of naturally fallen into the way that I approach issues. And from what I found at Snyk, our people team as well. So it's I would say the design thinking is a bit ingrained into the way that our entire people team or HR team approaches issues. So very early on, an exercise that we enacted was We all got around the table, and by got around the table, it was the pandemic. So sat at our coffee tables, kitchen tables, and got together on the same Zoom and mapped out the employee life cycle, and how each function played a role into those milestones, and what that looks like for the employee, what we wanted them to feel or experience, and how we can directly contribute to that and design that, as opposed to just hoping it will happen and telling people what they should experience. We turned it into action, and sort of came away with sprints there. And I think part of that is a bit of Snyk's culture. So our company is obsessed with developers and ensuring that they are enabled. And on the HR team, don't ask me about developers and how I can make their lives easier, because I will not know anything there. But in terms of employees and our customers, which are internal, I think this naturally played out where there was a bit of, or there was a lot of that approach in terms of empathizing with employees, meeting them where they are, collaborating with them early. Snyk is the culture is very much one that you get most of the people on the channel, as opposed to those direct messages, and get everyone around the table, the virtual table, and approach it head on there.
Yeah, and of course now we're at another sort of turning point in companies'
Right.
journey coming out of the pandemic, hopefully, right? And that's the fact that most organizations are going to transfer to some sort of a hybrid model. And I happened to see that 2 weeks ago or so, you were quoted in the Wall Street Journal
I
with
did.
a little blurb around, the hybrid work and the hybrid transformation that you've been engaged in at Snyk. Maybe let's talk, because I think this is top of mind for everybody right now, right? So maybe share with us how you're approaching the hybrid transformation in a human-centered way.
For sure. I think I do think this is such a relevant topic right now. And I think from what I've seen, it's very easy to over-index one way or the other, right? Which is either this is the way that it is, and you need to be in the office 5 days a week, and you need to return to the workplace as if nothing happened, or everything's kind of up in the air and you do what you will, which then often leads to the questions of, well, what is the expectation? What is my manager doing? You're checking in with other people. What do I need to come in the office on these days? Or a bit more confusion there. So I think the first approach was to understand what was working and what wasn't working from the pandemic. So what were those areas that people embraced? I think the reprioritization was a big one that we heard, in terms of caregiving for family, not having the commute time. And then what were some of those pain points? And I think by being able to map those out, we started to create these three personas in terms of what we were hearing from our people in terms of the way that they wanted to work. So we created these three profiles of in office, flex, or remote. So for those that really took to this remote workplace in terms of being able to do a load of laundry and then go back to their desk and having that flexibility, there is that option. So we took all of those wins that we heard from the pandemic and applied it there. In terms of
can I just interject? How did you collect that input from the employees that was used to create those personas?
For sure. So a lot of this was just the conversations we were having with employees. So very early on, we created a bit of a check-in cadence with employees. So whether it was 15 minutes with 10 employees per week or whatever that may be, with just kind of probing questions in terms of what were the areas that, like, the pain points they were experiencing. Some for a more immediate solution, others for longer term things that we had to keep in mind there. So a lot of that was then again put into buckets. So what are the pain points of working remotely? What are the pain points of collaborating remotely, working at a global company remotely? And what are things that are missed as well? So a lot of it was from those conversations with employees and a bit of those probing questions. We had surveys as well, because not everyone I recognize, where we were a company of we were a company of 500 at the time. We now are at about 720 or so.
Hmm.
And that's even that's a huge lift on the people team who are
Hmm.
also going through exactly what everybody else is. So on that side, we also had more automated formats for
Yeah.
collecting this information. So surveys that were sent out, opportunities for continuing that conversation if what people wanted to share a bit more on one of the questions. There were comments, there was the ability to put in their name as well. So
Hmm.
it
Cool.
was just, go
And
ahead.
then, so you created these, out of that, you created these three personas.
Exactly.
And then, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No
Just
worries. So
elaborating on those.
exactly. So I think part of the part of this was socializing it, right? So part of this is to share that with employees and talk through
Mm,
these personas and see, and a part of it is to hear from employees, what would you choose, but also it's an
mm,
opportunity to then hear, well, what about this, what is it about being flex? So do I need to come into the office 5 days a week if I'm in office? So those questions really informed how we rolled out the education format, in terms of the questions that we would sort of we would anticipate. um, so on that side, I would say next steps were to roll it out in November, introduce it to the company, and share with them what the expectation was from Snyk, which was, we want you to be able to do your best work no matter where that may be. So for any roles that were specifically, for example, tied to an office, it would be explicitly called out in the job description. And that aside from that, employees could work flex, remote, uh, in office. And so from there, granted, all of our offices were closed at that time. So this
mhm.
was very much ideation. This is very much, this is what we're rolling out, but we're not going to
Theoretical.
enact this.
Hmm.
Exactly. But either way, it was a really great opportunity, again, to socialize it to an even broader audience, which was our entire company. So we gathered more feedback from that. And again, sort of pivoted, said, okay, this is the feedback that we're hearing about this persona, or this question is coming up again and again. Let's revisit how we approach that. So now Snyk is going to be rolling out flex work in terms of enacting it,
Mm,
when offices reach 75% capacity or more. So
mhm.
employees are able to make that selection again. So we'll be able to use the data from their preferences. They'll be able to come into the office, see how they want to work, and then make that selection again at the end of this month. So it's an exciting time there. So again, we're revisiting it, because for some employees, a lot of employees, November was very long ago. So
Mhm.
I think we could all use a bit of revisiting and saying, what does this look like in practice?
And I saw you used the term revisiting, but you used one in our pre-conversation, which I love even better. It's, you called it, I think, failing fabulously. Can,
Yes.
I love that. Can you talk, because obviously from that theoretical ideation through all the iterations that you've done, it sounds like along with the employees, what were some of the challenges or barriers that came up that you didn't anticipate and that you then solved in co-creation? Or was there pushback from leadership or whatever about this approach? Because there's so many things that need to be weighed, right? From safety to cost to employee experience, all these things. What were some of those maybe sticky points where you had to fail fabulously, and how did you address that?
Oh, this is a good
That you
question.
can share.
um, I mean, look, in my entire career, I've failing fabulously is a theme, and then you get up and you
Love that.
pivot. Um,
Love that.
but I think some of the areas where we had those, oh,
Oops.
didn't think of that
Yeah.
moments.
Because how could you,
Um,
right? Nobody knew. Nobody
exactly.
literally knew it. What?
I I think part of it was the return to workplace. I think we made the assumption that because most employees had worked remotely, but most all employees had
Mm,
been working remotely for the last 18 months,
mhm,
um, that the behaviors of inclusivity would remain, just because
mm,
everyone could be empathetic with remote employees,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
just because everyone had experienced it. But we did find that, um, it's easy to slide back into
Yeah.
our previous ways of working. So for example, having a
Mm-hmm.
call with three people around a conference table,
Mm-hmm.
and having one person that's on the like zooming in or
Mm-hmm.
virtually dialing in. um, the side chatter, it creates an
Yeah.
experience of exclusivity.
Yeah.
So it's just little behaviors like that we
Mm-hmm.
had to pick up on and say, oh, how do we anticipate this, how do we solve for this, and really cultivate these behaviors that continue an inclusive culture in a hybrid workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one offhand. I would say it
Yeah.
was, we thought about everything from masks and hand sanitizer, and you're very caught up in making people feel confident walking into the office, and ensuring that it's a comfortable experience, that there are those details that are are less apparent, I would say, that you just kind of notice after.
And also, you have sort of I guess, a priority list, right? I mean, health and safety does come first, right? So, and if that's not a given, people just don't feel safe being in the space, right? And then
Exactly.
it's that behavioral component. How do people behave safely in the office with each other, right? And what does
Mm-hmm.
that look like? And then in a hybrid world, between people in the office and people working virtually and all people working virtually, right? So,
Exactly.
and I recently wrote an article, and it's not almost, it is, if you're all virtual or you're all in the office from an HR perspective, those scenarios are easier
Mm-hmm.
than the complexity of the hybrid workplace, right?
Exactly.
So I think it's impossible to anticipate, or for you to anticipate, all these challenges. But so it sounds like, so with this as well, the way you solved this was by applying again a human-centered approach. So bringing this up to the employees, or how did you sort of co-create then a solution to these behaviors?
Oh, for
How did
sure.
you
And
approach
I think part of this is that this is a massive experiment,
it? Mm-hmm.
and I would be lying if I said that we had all of the answers,
Yep.
nor do we to this. But I think part of part of being human is calling out these behaviors and recognizing what the impact is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of that is just communicating that, look, this is just be cognizant,
Mm-hmm.
that employees are experiencing this. Like, we're excited for you to get back into the office, but also recognize that it's not just everyone dialing in on Zoom anymore, that uh, we need to, as a company, practice more inclusive behaviors, and recognize that we should be including others on the tone, so, or others on the call. So we've started dialing in from our own laptops as well. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone is getting this sort of like Brady Bunch image on the screen. So it's not just one person
Mm-hmm.
that's taking up the entire screen. It's also it's a visual reminder, because it's easy to slide back into it. You turn to the person to your right
Yeah.
and ask a question. But when you have that visual in front of you, it's a constant reminder of what everyone else is experiencing on the call as well.
And I love that. And I love that you said this is a huge experiment. And because I think that's where all companies are at right now. And to have this experimentation mindset, the failing fabulously, but then the co-creation and the transparent communication with the employees. And, I always say, let's treat our employees as adults, right? They have managed through a pandemic. They should have earned our trust. And now how do we figure out the next step with them? Right. And I think we've seen companies who have not done this, or don't do it, might find themselves in the media these days, right? I mean,
Yeah.
worst case scenario, and people leaving, right? We have the what's it called, the great resignation. It's
Yeah.
termed right now, right? People are voting with their feet. So I mean, I'm biased towards human-centered
For
co-creation,
sure.
but I feel especially with this topic, if we don't do that as companies, we are gonna lose out in one way or another.
Oh, absolutely. I think this idea of returning to normal, when I was talking about the indexing, the
Mm-hmm.
over indexing,
Yeah,
it that clearly is not an approach to, or that using an empathetic approach, because that would be ignoring what everyone went through for the last
yeah,
18 months and assuming that nothing happened between March of 2020 and now, that, okay, back to work. Um, I think people are, I think if anything, the pandemic has helped us reprioritize what our needs are.
mm,
And I think the blurred lines over the last 18 months have certainly helped with that as well. I mean, I've see my CEO taking a call from his living room in a t-shirt. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just it's opened a bit of that door to the lives of others, um, and really it kind of forced, not even forced, but I hopefully forces companies to recognize this is a priority for people, and they want to be treated as humans.
Love that. Going back to the design thinking a bit, what's your favorite design thinking resource or hack?
Ooh, um, over I would say over the last 18 months, when I talk about getting around the table
Hmm.
and the likes, for sure it's the virtual collaboration tools. So whether
Hmm.
that's your mural, your
Hmm.
Miro,
Hmm.
I truly enjoy that. When I was a teacher, like having a smart board was just, oh, it was amazing. It, like having that or the whiteboard. But there's really so much you could do with that, and I think it engages people at another level as opposed to just conversation. You're applying to different types of learning and different levels of engagement. So I would definitely say your virtual collaboration tools, whatever they may be.
Sure.
And another I would say is it's so on the nose, but staying in touch. I think sometimes it's very
Mm.
easy to get locked in a room and create a policy or a process based on ideation and theoretics, that you lose touch with where people actually are. So when I was talking earlier to how we were gathering information about how employees were experiencing the pandemic, what the biggest pain points were, the wins were, what should we take with us, what should we be cognizant of. Um, I would say, however, you can get that feedback in as many different forms as possible. So at Snyk, it's funny, but a lot of the most insightful moments are when I have a donut call with someone. So donuts, we have every couple of weeks, you have somebody within the company that you normally wouldn't interact with, and it randomizes this kind of matchup, and you have a 15-30 minute call.
Hmm.
And some of the most insightful moments are when I'm talking to employees and just the little tidbits that I hear about what they're experiencing. Like, a part of it is the way that you question. But I think part of it is also just hearing about people's lives and where they're
Mm.
coming from. Like, what
Hmm.
are the things that concern them, that motivate them? What are they worried about? What are they excited about? Um, so whether that's donut calls, or whether that's surveys or focus groups, however that is, just staying in touch with people so you can stay human. But also, I think just the more human connections you have within your company, the more engaged you are as well.
I love that. It also has that element of serendipity, which people always say that's why we have to go back to the office because only there can those moments happen. So it's sort of, how can we bring that also into the virtual world with tools like that? And then also it's almost like also a research tool for you as employee experience designer, right? Because it's unstructured, informal connections that you're making and you're hearing in addition to the structured inputs that you're gathering, right? So
Yeah.
it's you stay close to the employees as well in your role, I can imagine.
Oh, for sure. I think you always have to keep a pulse on where people are within the company. When are the ups? When are the downs?
Hmm. Hmm. So I always close by reading you a quote and letting you react to that. Are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
You're ready. All right. Quote. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Unquote. Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, this hits the feels. This is, um, I think there's no one point that stands out. Uh, the entire quote, I think, is telling and as an impactful and true. I think once you this kind of literally, we were just talking about this,
Hmm.
keeping a pulse on the office and having those interactions with people, they respond more. People in general will respond more to empathy, will respond more to, we're seeing this again and again, to transparent leaders, to leaders that are being authentic and vulnerable. And I think any sort of inspiration is, there needs to be that connection, that sort of feeling of being heard and seen and cared for. So I am saving that quote. And I think that just captures everything that we were talking about. And it's so impactful, particularly at this moment in time.
What a great last word to close out this episode. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was great to have you, Diana.
Nicole, thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful being here.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.